that we ask them to do to keep us safe.
Danny Kruger.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's an honour to take part in this debate, and I pay tribute to the committees, the Defence Committee and the Public Accounts Committee, for what I agree are exceptionally good reports, and I echo my friend from Hereford on that point. This is possibly the most important speech I'll give as an MP, and I do so on behalf of the military in my constituency of Devizes. I have the honour to represent the garrison towns of Tidworth and Bulford and Larkhill and others, and I went up on Salisbury Plain recently with Colonel Matt Palmer, who's the commander of the Army South West, and he just showed me with the sweep of his arm where 20,000 of our armed forces live and work. But my friend from Hereford said we're not here just as ambassadors of our constituencies, and I speak in my role as an MP about the essential imperative of national security. But just making another local point, Madam Deputy Speaker, in Devizes constituency is also the site of the Battle of Roundway Down, which was the most successful battle on the Royalist cause in the English Civil War. It gave the South West to the King for the next 2 years. And I mention the Battle of Roundway Down because it was that battle, that defeat of the parliamentary forces, which spurred the reform of the parliamentary army and created the new model army, which of course went on to win the Civil War and transformed the model of the way that the military in this country and indeed across Europe was organised for decades to come. And the lesson of the new model army, of the reforms that happened in very short order in the 1640s, wasn't about a major new doctrine of warfighting. It was just about the imperative of having a well-equipped, well-trained, well-led army, innovative, agile, professional, and with high morale. And we need that again. And I mention it, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's in my mind because yesterday I had the pleasure of attending a session at the Royal United Services Institute, organised by the New Bletchley Foundation, led by Brigadier Nigel Hall, and they issuing a report with input from the galaxy of very distinguished former generals and other experts. And Sir Richard Barrons was on the panel, Professor Michael Clark and others. And they put forward, in a very short report, which members can find online, a proposal for a reconfigured army. And the point they made, and it's a point that's been made already repeatedly in this debate, is the simple one, that we have to be ready to fight the war that we wish to deter. We have to be ready to fight the war we wish to deter, and that means really ready. It doesn't just mean ready on paper, ready plausibly in a way that might convince someone on the doorstep that we're making sufficient investments in the army. We need to know that we're ready, and crucially our enemy needs to know that we're ready. And I echo the points made by the Chairman of the Defence Committee and my friend from Rayleigh and Wickford about the fact that our enemy know what our capabilities are. They're not going to be deceived by a spin from a press officer in Whitehall. It is absolutely essential that we really are ready to fight the war. So the sad fact is, and there is no point, given the point I've just made, in sugarcoating this, that we are not ready to fight the war that we wish to deter. And these reports, I'm afraid to say, make that plain. And I have great respect for ministers on the front bench, and I recognise the genuine investments that are going into parts of our armed forces, which are extremely welcome and welcome in my constituency. But the fact is that, as General Barron said yesterday, we are back, and I quote, "We are back in a moment of existential risk in an era of great power confrontation." So laying aside the fantasies of the post-Cold War world of being somehow beyond war and just of course with this crucial difference of the high-tech domains that we are now coming to terms with. And of course, also unlike the mid-20th century, we've hollowed out our army over the last 30 years, and I echo the very powerful points made by my friend from Rayleigh and Wickford, the comparison with the 1930s, that low, dishonest decade, as it's famously been called. And of course, it's in fact 3 decades that we have suffered disinvestment in. So having acknowledged the major commitments of funding that are being made to the armed forces, I do want to highlight the point that our commitments are insufficient at the moment. And I recognise that abstract percentages of GDP are in a sense secondary to the real question of how we spend money and where it goes. But I do think it is important. And the basic fact is that we do need to be spending more than 2%. We need to be spending more than 2.5%. We need to be spending at least 3%. Madam Deputy Speaker, just consider if the worst comes to the worst and the US does withdraw its NATO commitments, as we hear threatened from time to time. We'd all be needing to reach at least 4% across the NATO alliance if we were just to maintain the current strength that NATO has without the US. How does it give way?
From my honourable friend, and indeed recent meetings I've been at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly are assessing that actually it would be a 5% increase in GDP on top of current spend if the Americans were to pull out.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm grateful to him for that. And of course, you know, these figures seem extraordinarily large to us, but consider if the worst really comes to the worst, and we are actually in a hot war in Europe, we'd be back to spending significantly more. It was 50% of GDP, I understand, during World War II. So these figures are essentially marginal in light of the potential. The point's been made, and it can't be made enough, that before defence gets more money, it does need to spend its own money better, and I echo the points made about the importance of procurement reform. The Public Accounts Committee report is absolutely damning. A £17 billion deficit between the MOD's budget and its official capability requirements, which is perhaps, as my honourable friend said, an underestimate given the way these numbers are calculated. So I'm very concerned about that. And I'll just make a quick point in passing. I'll be interested in the Minister's thoughts on this when he winds up about the nuclear budget. And the fact is there is real concern, I think, about the way that the replacement of Trident is going to be accounted for. And I think there is a real danger that if that is just part of general MOD capital expenditure, it could end up cannibalising conventional weapons. And it is very important, given the long-standing tradition, that we keep Trident, we keep nuclear separate from conventional weapons budgets.
Given what the honourable gentleman has just said, would he then agree that it would be good to have tighter scrutiny of that, which might mean a new system set up so that we could look at sensitive matters?
I recognise the point made there, and I will defer to the front bench on what's appropriate in terms of transparency, but I do recognise the point made in her report, and I think in the Defence Committee report as well, about the difficulty of getting information that the committees need in order to do their work. And I recognise that nuclear is identified, obviously, as a separate line within the budget, and it is protected in theory. I'm just concerned about what might be a marginal increase in this enormous budget, around a quarter of our total defence spending. If that increases even marginally and the shortfall has to be made up from our conventional defence budget, then that entails a significant reduction in that conventional spending, which is so important at the present time.
Will you give me?
Perhaps give way.
Very quickly. According to the MOD's own figures in the latest supplementary estimates, the amount that we're spending on what they call the defence nuclear enterprise is now gusting towards 20%. So everything he says about the risk of that gradually eating everything else is entirely correct.
Very grateful. Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker. So if we manage to get the genuine increase in defence spending that is needed, the question then arises how to spend that. Where should the money go? And I hope I say this not just on behalf of the 20,000 or so defence personnel in Wiltshire, but because it's the right thing to do. We need to put people first. And I recognise there has been a significant step change in the doctrine of defence policy in recent years towards the recognition that an army is fundamentally about its people. And I respect that. The fact is, probably because of the many decades of disinvestment, we have a problem of low morale, of low pay, often poor housing, a shoestring training budget, all of which contributes to the recruitment crisis that we have in the armed forces, which my honourable friend mentioned. The fact is, and the PAC report makes this very clear, we are losing people faster than we can recruit them, and that is an entirely unacceptable situation for us to be in. We absolutely have to improve recruitment. The Public Accounts Committee, I understand, heard that we are, for every 5 people recruited to the armed services, 8 are leaving. That is a national security crisis, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's not just a problem for recruitment, it's an absolute profound security risk. So I think, and I recognise the point you made about we've had too many reviews, so I hesitate to use the word. If I can think of another word, I would. We need a very quick, total review of the people issue in our armed forces. It can be done quickly, and all it probably entails is a sort of amalgamation of all the work that's been done by others. But I would like to see it with a great degree of urgency, looking at recruitment, terms and conditions, families, crucially, onward progression in all 3 services, so that we can instill with the urgency that is required to turn around the recruitment crisis we're in. So, having made the general point about the importance of investment in people, come quickly to major services of the armed forces. Firstly, the Navy, and it is of course important that we invest in all 5 domains, including in the grey zone, the sub-threshold activity. It is so important. But our principal specialism in the United Kingdom, historically and now, remains our sea power. And I think it is a very good thing that we are moving towards a maritime strategy. I recognise that that is the priority of the government, and I say this as a representative of a landlocked county which has all these soldiers in it. Nevertheless, I recognise we need significant investment in the Navy, and I'd like to see more. We'd all like to see these things, but let's actually do it. Let's have more submarines, more escorts, more minesweepers. We need seabed warfare vessels. And I just on that point of the seabed, when it's Deputy Speaker, I just call the attention of the House to a report from Policy Exchange a month or so ago talking about the Western approaches and the very significant threat that we face in these islands and indeed across Europe from the threat from to the undersea infrastructure that is fundamentally our responsibility on behalf of Europe to protect. So on the Army, mention the new model Army and the new Bletchley report, I would like to see a real commitment to a reformed and modernised Army. We've got to recognise Nick Carter's point, former CDS, said that the Army is the weakest of the 3 services. This is a sad state of affairs. I suppose one of them's got to be the weakest. I'm sorry, it's the Army. There are big questions over our ability to field a division in Europe, as promised to NATO. According to a senior US officer, the UK can't even be called a Tier 1 power. And I understand that the committees were told by a former commander of the Joint Forces Command that our Army won't be ready to fulfil its NATO commitments until the early 1930s. And indeed, that was the assumption of the integrated review. So we are in a sense back to 2030. So we are in a sense back to the 10-year rule, which is not how things should be. Did I say 1930s?
You did.
I think we're up to speed on that. 2030. So the case for investment in the Army is very, very obvious, and the good news is that it is easier and quicker and cheaper to refit and to upscale the Army than it is for the Navy. The kit is smaller and cheaper. But we don't just need the same Army, we need, but bigger. We need a medium-sized Army, bespoke for the job that will be done. I think the member for North Durham made the point right about the sort of Army that we need. It needs, of course, in the resonant phrase, to defend these islands, but it also needs to act in partnership with other services and with our allies in the West. We don't need another great new major continental army like the Poles are building. We need a rapid reaction, joint expeditionary force, agile, mobile, able to do the job that's required in partnership with our allies. And quickly on the sphere of operations, ultimately our commitments need to reflect the threats that we face. And in a sense, those are classified. And I recognise the challenge that the committees have had about identifying what our capabilities are, given the tasks that ultimately the ministers set for them, and we can't always know exactly what these are. These defence planning assumptions being classified now. Nevertheless, I think it is fair to say, and I must say, echo the point made by the gentleman for North Durham. I'm delighted about AUKUS. I think it's a tremendous step forward in our international role, and it's a great thing for British security. So I'm not averse to these global arrangements. They're absolutely right. And I love the deployment of the Queen Elizabeth and the Carrier Strike Group to Japan. I thought that was lovely. But fundamentally, we are committed, and we should be committed to the defence of the Euro-Atlantic area. And for that purpose, and I'll be winding up now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have to restore the mass of our own armed forces and our own army, and that means growing our capabilities here at home. More regulars. We need to get back towards 80 or 90,000 regular forces. We need to grow the reserve force. 30,000 is not enough, even if that 30,000 are real, which I don't believe it is. We need to significantly grow the reserve force. And I think a campaign to grow our reserves is necessary, not just for its own sake, but it's a great exercise in communication to the public about the imperative of us all to step up and play our role in the defence of our country. And there is a great deal of concern, I think misplaced, about the attitude of the British people to fighting. Of course, we had this in the 1930s too. Lots of people saying the British wouldn't fight. Of course they would, and of course they did. And of course they will, if they have to answer their country's call. Young people in particular. They'll do it with irony, perhaps certainly with memes, but they'll do it. They'll sign up if they need to. And because this is not an abstraction. We already have seen in this last year or two what war in our region means. It means inflation. Imagine that at a great, imagine that tenfold if war breaks out, in which our country is directly involved. Cyber attacks on a terrible scale. So we are now at a turning point, as so many members have said, and it is a time for all of us as a country to step up. This is an opportunity and an imperative on us to strengthen our nation. That's about industrial resilience. It's about our own food supply. It's about our supply chain. It's about our steel capacity, about our manufacturing capacity. There is a huge opportunity, as the Honourable Lady said, about the importance of the industrial supply chain. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the time for us all to do what's needed.
Order. I am getting concerned because whilst I have not got a